Welcome to the Quiverful Adoptions podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey. We are two adoptive mamas who have walked in your shoes, so we get it.
We remember the crazy journey of adoption like it was yesterday, and we are so thankful we get to share some amazing stories with you right here from the living room of our office.
Well, actually, we're sitting in the bathroom, but the living room does sound better.
Anyway, none of that matters. We're glad you're here.
So grab a cup of coffee and join us as we dive right in.
Hey guys! We are so excited that you are listening today.
Super excited to have y'all here.
It's been a very interesting week at the Bordeaux house. Grant broke his leg yesterday.
Poor guy. Not just his leg, but his femur, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. So he has a thigh-high soft cast, and we're excited about getting a hard cast tomorrow.
So you know how fun it is to keep a 4-year-old from walking?
Yeah, pretty much impossible.
Yep. So Elizabeth, we were talking earlier about a hilarious story that revolving around Grant. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that story?
So just talking about the innocence of a child, obviously we talk about adoption a lot in our family. Probably not every day since he was born, but it's pretty close. And so he is very aware that he is adopted. We talk about adoption all the time, and yet he still, the other day we were sitting there at dinner and he got within an inch of his sister's face and leaned in. And well, first of all, so something that we are figuring out is that since we adopted Ellie, he's become more interested in his adoption story. So before then, he didn't have quite as many questions, and now those questions are starting to evolve, partly because I think of his age, but then also because of him being a big part of our adoption with Ellie. But he leaned in really close to her face and just said, "Ellie, you were donated." And then started laughing. And we started laughing because we didn't really catch on what he was talking about. And then as the night went on, I said, "Grant, do you mean adopted?" And he said, "Yeah, donated." And I said, "Buddy, that is not the same thing." And so then we had to have a conversation about how donated and adopted is not the same thing. But just goes to show you, like, we can literally talk about our children's stories from day one, and little truths seep in, but then also just as much seeps in starts to seep out. And so we have to just reinforce that story so that in their mind, they get those confusion or little mix-up things corrected.
Yeah, that's so true. You have to continue to just make it a part of daily conversation.
Right. So, Casey, who do we have that we're talking to today on the podcast?
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Today we have Ashley Mitchell. She's the founder of Lifetime Healing, LLC. Also, Big Tough Girl over on Instagram. Mm-hmm. Lifetime Healing is a post-placement care network for women after they have placed their child for adoption. Ashley is a birth mom of 12 and a half years and is still learning to navigate life as a birth mom. She lives in Utah with her husband and 2 children and is active in the adoption community, raising awareness that lifetime counseling should not be a luxury, it should be the standard. Ashley spoke at our gala last year, back in September.
And she's grown to be one of our really good friends. We, of course, admire her work in the adoption community, but man, she's been just a great friend for Casey and myself, and we talk about all things from football to adoption, and it's been great getting to know her. So we're really excited for you guys to tune in.
Yeah, let's dive on in.
Hey guys! We have Ashley Mitchell here today. Ashley, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
Hi guys, it's so glad to be here.
Yeah, well, take a few minutes, Ashley, and just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and your story.
Oh, goodness. So I am a wife and mother of 2 children. My husband and I live in Utah. I'm going to be 39 very soon. And I am a birth mother. I placed my son for adoption. Oh, he will be 13 in April. So almost 13 years post-placement, and I own the LLC Lifetime Healing, and just after a lot of my own grief and trauma. My personal adoption navigated from closed to open. As I was in really heavy seasons of grief, I had a closed adoption. From my choice. And then we fought really, really hard to work back to where we are now. We have an incredible open adoption relationship now. My son gets to come and sleep over. He spent a week with us this past summer. And it's been amazing. It's been really amazing and beautiful, but we work really, really hard at it. It is not something that comes natural. It's not something that is easy. And the farther we get into this relationship, the more we realize that what was working doesn't anymore. So we're constantly shifting and adjusting. But it's incredible. And we are all willing to show up for each other. So after my seasons of real grief and trauma, I started to look for support and couldn't find anything that met the love and hate in the same breath. It was either one or the other. The communities were very angry and hurt, or they weren't really acknowledging the pain and trauma that exists with placing a child for adoption. And so I just said, well, fine, I'll just start my own. And so we started doing online groups for women. And we just realized that we really needed the support of the agencies that had the licensed professionals to manage this kind of trauma. And so now I get to travel and train agencies all over the country on post-placement care and really encourage them and support them in hosting free support groups for women. So that's just kind of who I am and kind of what we're doing.
That's incredible. Well, can you start out just by speaking to hopeful adoptive families who are just starting out that maybe literally have just heard about open adoption and are terrified? Maybe give them a little perspective and help clear up any bad education that they maybe have seen in movies and television.
Yeah. So I always say that the internet is the best and worst thing that's ever happened to adoption. So if you'll just stay off of Google and not watch Lifetime movies, you'll be just fine. I think the biggest tip that I would give families right now that are really terrified, that are really just starting to educate themselves, is to know your source. We use in this community adoption as a blanket statement. And then under that blanket, we've got international adoption, we've got foster care, we've got domestic adoption, we've got kinship adoption, and none of them are the same animal. And so when you say adoption, everyone's going to respond with opinions, but you need to know where that's coming from, because someone that's sharing some of the trauma of foster care is not going to be relatable to your domestic adoption experience. And we have to be aware of where the education is coming from and be able to decipher between the two and not take it on as our own. Just because it happened to somebody else doesn't mean that that's going to be your story. And understanding that it's coming 100% from their own place of trauma and experience and literally has nothing to do with what you're going to walk through. I think that's the biggest thing, is understanding the source that it's coming from.
Absolutely.
So a few months ago, we had a conversation about us seeing so many families getting their babies home and then all of a sudden feeling very territorial. I'm sure you remember that conversation that we had together. Maybe not with our adoptive family specifically, but just in the adoption community as a whole. It can be something as simple as, we don't really want to send her any more pictures since she isn't responding to them. Or do we really have to meet up with her? I can tell she isn't doing well emotionally. Or maybe she's had a relapse. What are some of the ways that we can help our families, or any family that's listening to this, let go of their feelings of possessiveness and embrace the birth family as a part of their family?
So I swear you guys gave me all the questions that were going to be the hardest that you guys didn't want to answer specifically. Because these ladies know me so well, they know that I will talk to things that maybe they won't or can't. Maybe ones that you can't.
Love you for that.
There's a really interesting power shift that takes place, and not necessarily in a negative way, but what happens that maybe we're not even aware of, and most of the time it's not intentional, but when the mothers are pregnant, these expectant mothers they have all the control. They have all the power. They get to make all the decisions. They get to decide what happens, what the hopeful adoptive parents can and can't do, if they have a say, if they don't. And that's a really scary space to sit in, especially families that are maybe coming through infertility or other failed adoptions where they've been so out of control of things in their life for so long. So that's why you'll see hopeful adoptive families be like crazy with their home study paperwork and the checklists and all the things. They can control what they can because everything else is so out of their hands. But what happens then is when the mothers relinquish, the shift changes, and now the adoptive parents have all the control and all the say. And you don't get to have a relationship with this child unless I deem it so. And I know that sounds really negative, but I know that's not intentional, but that's what takes place. Is there is a shift in power with relinquishment. And what does that look like? And we have to really be honest about whether you are punishing her for all the situations and all the times that you felt out of control of everything, and now you get to control everything. And are you being a little possessive in that space? These are questions that really force you guys to be really honest with yourselves and where you're at in this season. And are you punishing her intentionally or not? And understanding that this isn't about ownership. So Lana and I, so my his name is Derek, and Lana and I have come to a space. So when I tell adoptive parents that Derek came to sleep over for a week, you just hear everyone go, like, and I'm like, you guys, I give him back. Like, it's not kidnapping. Like, it's such a foreign concept to say, to want to take ownership over that title of motherhood. We put way too much focus over the possession of a child and the ownership of a title that we forget the relational part of this open adoption. And so when Derek was dropped off at my house to come and sleep over, she was like, I'll see you in 3 days. It was like, there is room for both of us. And by Derek wanting to go and spend time with Ashley does not diminish my role as his mother in any way, shape, or form. And right. I can promise you, when she pulled up to pick him up, and I get like emotional about this already, but he bolted to her and basically tackled her on the front lawn. And it wasn't to say, I didn't have fun with you, or this wasn't awesome, or that I don't appreciate you, but it was like, oh, I get to go home to mom in my life. And there's no room for competition in that space, because at the end of the day, Derek needs both of us, and there's room for both of us.
Right. Absolutely.
One of the things that we've heard, like after the Back to Basics training, the number one thing that people message us about is exactly that, where you bring up in the class where Derek spent the night with you. And a lot of the families are like, we feel like she's pressuring us to make that part of our story too. And what we try to remind our families is everybody's story is different. So different. Your child's birth mom may not even want that.
That's
or
right.
may be in a totally different place and dynamic in her life than what Ashley Mitchell, founder of Lifetime Healing, is in at this point in time, you know?
And also that it took Ashley, how many years? 12 years before
12
she
years.
was ready for that. So, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things that we see with our families is this, I love how you said punishment earlier, where it's the families are trying to punish the birth mom. But honestly, it's not even a punishment to the birth mom. It ends up being a punishment to the child whenever you refuse to give them that open adoption. Can you talk a little bit about how open adoption has impacted Derek, either in a positive or a negative way, and how you feel like if you were to have a closed adoption, that might be different for him? I know that's a lot of like assumptions.
Yeah.
And what ifs,
yeah.
But
and I did really, I loved what you guys said about that, feeling the pressure to have what Derek and I have, that's not about that if that's making, families uncomfortable, that it's about stepping back and saying, maybe it's because I really have been neglecting some of this that really needs to be done. I've been holding these things back, and she's saying, hey, I am letting it all in. And what does that look like to you? And so it really is a matter of saying, hey, there's a space for both. However you guys figure that out, that's fine. But you can't shut down when and be so afraid that it's going to diminish your role. Because I think at the root of it, that's the issue, is that we're afraid that desire from the biological child is going to diminish the role as you as mother. Right. And so, I can't speak to Derek because Derek and I haven't had these kinds of conversations as far as open adoption, but I will say this because these are the conversations that we've had. He also has a sibling that's adopted, and we have very different open adoption relationships because Lana is amazing at loving us individually. Just like if we have more than one child, we love to say we love our children all the same, but do we really? Like my husband and I parent 2 children, and I have to love my 8-year-old daughter way different than I love my 6-year-old son.
Right.
And it's the same with our adopted children. We have to love them through their different seasons and ages, and depending on the sex that they are, and depending on the kind of open adoption relationships that they have. And so I know his sister has a very open adoption relationship where they spend a lot of time together, and it took me 12 years to get to where he could come and spend one night with me. You know what I mean? And so, but I do know that as he got older, when Derek was younger, it was the mothers made all the decisions. There's fathers in the picture too. He has obviously an adoptive father that's in the picture,
Right.
but typically these relationships are navigated between mother and mother. That's just kind of the natural tendency of this relationship. And so for most of his life, Derek's mom and I made the arrangements for meetings and what our open adoption relationship was going to look like. And then all of a sudden, Derek had a voice, and he had opinions, and he had things that he wanted that he hadn't been getting. I remember I think he was 9, and I was in a bookstore in Arizona walking around with my sister and all my family, and I got a text, and he's like, "Hey, this is Derek." And I was like, "Oh, does your mom know you're texting me? Like, are you going to get in trouble? Like, I don't want this to be in secret. Like, what are you doing?" And it rocked me, but it hit me in the face like, oh my gosh, he has a voice now. And so now our open adoption relationship isn't between her and me, it's between us and Derek. And when he needs something, now it's about meeting his needs. And so it wasn't about, I want sleepovers and I have this expectation that they're going to give me the sleepovers because they need to love me well in my open adoption. It was, Derek wants a sleepover. Can you offer that? And it shifted our entire open adoption relationship. So whether it's better or not open or closed, I won't answer that because I think that that's too individual for each relationship. Right. But I will say that when Derek started asking for stuff, it was because he had needs that had not been met, and we had to readjust our thinking.
Absolutely. I think that's probably the biggest fear. I know I can even speak to personally, like as an adoptive parent, that we're going to get to that point. And maybe that's why it's so scary hearing, your story and Derek's story, because as an adoptive parent, we have this fear that when our kids get big enough to have that voice and to say, hey, I really want this, that we're going to feel like we didn't do enough or we didn't provide enough. Can you speak just so briefly about like how maybe you and Lana kind of navigated that? Like, okay, Derek's got these expectations now or these desires, and this is shifting the way that our adoption looks and feels and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's really interesting too, when you talk about the fear, when people hear my story, when they're coming in and just seeing all of this and hearing all of this for the first time, they really do forget, guys, I am almost 13 years out, and right. We have had, I promise you, if you would have known me through the first 5 years, I was the stereotypical birth mom. I was a really shitty birth mom to her and to him, and they're looking at me now and they'll be like, oh, well, it's not going to be like that. You're right. It might not be, because it wasn't for a really long time. Right. What it looked like for us. So after we had had a lot of years of closed, I came to her after my husband and I were married and we had our first child together. And I just said, hey, I'm ready. I would love to be able to see him if you are comfortable with that. And I expected a no, but she immediately was like, yes, we're all in. We've been waiting for you. But it started really slowly. The sleepovers didn't come for years later. It didn't just like, oh, you've been gone for all this time and now let's have a sleepover. No,
Right.
we spent a lot of years rebuilding trust, and that looked like text messages and emails, and we still met in neutral spaces. We went to public parks. We went to public restaurants once every 6 months. You guys, it was baby steps back to getting to what it is now. And even now, I saw Derek once last year, and it was our week together. I mean, that's not very often. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not like it's not shared custody. I don't have him every other weekend and Wednesdays. That's not our arrangement.
Right.
So, but what it looks like for us now is Derek wants a visit or is thinking about me and wants to see me, and he goes to his parents. He goes to his mom and dad, and they sit down and talk it out. And if they aren't comfortable with it, I don't even know about it. They don't even approach me about it. So they do really good about saying, at the end of the day, we still have to make the decisions that are best. And so this fearful, well, if she requests it, then that has to be the final say. No, that is not what this looks like. Derek asks his parents, and they process as husband and wife and as the parents of Derek. And if they feel comfortable with it, then they come to me and say, this is what he's asking for. Are you comfortable with this? And then I take my time with my husband and kids because it affects everybody. They're all a part of my open adoption. And we process, and then we come back to them and say, okay, this is what it looks like. This is how it feels for us. Are you guys good with that? Yes. And then we make it happen. There's a lot of processing individually and together that takes place before these kinds of events actually take place.
Right.
But we're willing to show up and process with each other instead of make demands. And they process before they even come to me first because they're the parents of this child.
Right. That's so good. One of the things that, you know, whenever I talked about earlier how these adoptive families are going through your back to basics training, and they hear you talk about your overnight visits with Derek, I think that like their anxiety rises, and that's all they hear in that entire story. That's all they take away from it is that your child that you placed for adoption is spending the night with you. And so they're not taking into account that, you know, 10 years ago, you weren't in a place for that to happen, right? I mean, I know I'm probably putting words into your mouth, but I've heard your story before. Would you agree that 10 years ago, like, no, that probably wouldn't have been a good idea, but now like you're in a totally different place and it is a great idea at this point in your life?
10 years ago, we weren't even speaking to each other. So yeah, there has been some work to do. And even with the sleepover itself, you guys, I know everyone was like, oh my gosh, you know, if an adoptive parent from a birth mother perspective, if an adoptive parent said that he could come and sleep over, I would totally jump on it. And it wasn't like that for me, guys. This isn't just something like that I've just been waiting to get him away from them, because that's what they see. They see him leaving them and coming to me. Like, he needs her more. That's not, you guys, they asked me in November. It took me clear until the next April to give them an answer. Guys, this wasn't something that was done casually. This was months of anxiety and emotional trauma. And what does this look like for me? And can I be I hadn't been under the same roof with him since the night of the hospital 10 years prior. You guys, this is a process. And there's going to be countless adoptions that don't ever get to the sleepover stage. But I talk about the extreme in my story because we went from completely closed to having sleepovers. There's a whole lot of middle that you guys can work this adoption that feels comfortable to you. But the point of all of that story is that 10 years ago, we weren't even speaking. It wasn't until we were 5 years in that I even said, can you work on rebuilding trust with me. And then it wasn't even until 5 years after that it was, okay, can we consider one night? And then we started it with one night, and then we worked up to 4. Like, you know what I mean? So it's not something that we just randomly one day said, hey, do you want a summer vacation for a week at Ashley's? That's not what this looked like. It was over a decade of building this emotional resistance to this kind of stuff.
And I think that part of it is this idea that, okay, we have agreed on this type of adoption. And I know that we have talked with you a lot about this in the past, about how open adoption or a level of open adoption at birth is not going to be look the same. It's not going to feel the same as open adoption when the child's 2 or 4 or 6. It's an evolving thing. As the relationship evolves, so does the open adoption. And I know you're a huge advocate of coming back to the table. I think you've even said yearly would be a great thing to do, just to reevaluate. And I think that is something that with education, that these adoptive families are going to start maybe feeling more and more comfortable with as they grow in their education and knowledge of what an open adoption looks like, and that it isn't just a set in stone thing.
Yeah, I think at the core of all of this, the biggest issue is the comparison of one story to another.
Yeah.
That we talk so much about, because I created this whole movement around post-placement care and loving well in open adoption. So of course, I would be the quote unquote poster child for having this incredible, we had a week sleepover during the summer and all of this stuff. Right. Guys, that's not what this is about. The comparison of other open adoption stories is what's driving fear into your heart that you're never going to be able to meet that expectation. That is not what this is about. You have to walk out your open adoption. So again, knowing your source, pay attention to my story, but know that I'm 13 years out, and it doesn't have to look like that to love well and to love big. And so when you get in this cycle of comparison and am I doing enough, where are you getting that from? Right? Like, where is that conversation coming from? And beating yourself up because you don't feel comfortable with sleepovers, guys, you don't need to do that. That's not the expectation on the table. The expectation on the table is to say, show up, have uncomfortable conversations, acknowledge change. You've had relationships with humans before. So there has to, look at your marriage. My husband and I are going to be married 10 years. We're not the same as we were 10 years ago. Like, it's okay to adjust. There's no way, though, that you can go into this with the expectation that what you decide at the hospital is going to be long-term, because you're not even taking into consideration grief cycles and financial cycles and hardship from both sides. You have to be realistic that it's going to change and adjust. And that's okay. I tell people all the time, if you're not a flexible person, just don't adopt, because it will kill you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like imagining you telling your spouse, okay, at the altar as we're getting married, okay, our thing is going to be every, month we're going to go to this restaurant and sit down for a date, and as your marriage evolves, like, no, that's not something that's practical when you add kids to the mix and you add different schedules and you've got to figure out different times that you can. Yeah. It's very, like, it's a relationship at the end of the day, like you said.
The common thing here is to just love first and love well.
Right.
And if we can't do that, then we shouldn't be adopting. If we're not going into this with an attitude of, I'm going to love her and I'm going to love my child and I'm going to do what's best for all parties involved, then we shouldn't be adopting.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah, I agree. And it doesn't have to look a specific way. It doesn't have to follow. Open adoption is not about contract agreements. It's about staying open, literally, to each other and adjusting with the needs and the changes of everyone involved.
Right. So going back to the comment that I made earlier about, we don't really want to send her any more pictures since she isn't responding to them. This is a common thread that we see between adoptive families. One of the things that we say whenever they bring the baby home and consents are signed, like, send her pictures, like, even if they didn't really talk about it, because a lot of times we see that the moms are scared to ask for it. And then they'll say, well, she's not responding. And we're like, well, just send it until she's tells you, like, she doesn't want to see them anymore, because she's telling us that she is very thankful for these pictures and, loving the pictures, and it's helping her grieve. So we've talked about this with you before, and I love what you said last time. You probably don't remember, but you said, send the dang picture.
Yeah.
Sit there. Anyway, and do you want to elaborate on that? Like how you don't just stop doing something because she's not responding. A lot of times the moms don't even open the picture until they are at a place in their day where they feel like they're emotionally stable enough to open that picture, you know?
Yeah, so I want to validate the adoptive parents in this situation before I kind of touch on that, because when you're kind of in the, I hate this term, but for lack of a better one, kind of in that honeymoon phase when you guys have been chosen and you really get to know these expectant mothers. And I know that you guys are absolutely, you talk about you're going to love them, you're going to be blown away by how much you love them. But when you sit with them and watch them do what they do for you, there are no words. And you feel such an overflowing amount of love for these women and what they've done for you. And when and you guys are all in with each other, and we love you just as much. And it's this just, I've never seen a dynamic like it. It's just the most incredible, undescribable thing when that connection takes place, and that when we place those babies and relinquish those rights to those children, and what that looks like, the brokenness, but the love that the adoptive parents have is out of this world. And so, but what happens is when the birth mothers at that point step away, I know you guys feel that loss. And you're trying to process, like, I don't understand. Like, did I do, like, I thought she loved me too. And you really feel a loss of someone that you deeply loved and cared about. And so there's a weird disconnect that takes place. And it's really, really hard to have a one-sided relationship with someone that you love.
Right.
And so to pour into these mothers and not to get a response when you really love them, it becomes really frustrating and you become very irritated. It's so interesting, though, on the other side, that we're kind of feeling such a similar thing, but we're pounded into our head that after relinquishment, we have no rights, we have no rights, we have no rights. We don't even know if we can reach out and express anything. We don't even know if we can ask for a picture. We don't even know kind of what we're allowed to do and what we're not. Because, this relinquishment says you do not literally have any rights to this child in any way, shape, or form. And
It says about 10 times.
Yeah, and that's the last thing that we do at the hospital. And then it's like, oh crap, am I even allowed to reach out and see how they're doing? So there's this unspoken, very mutual feeling, but just nobody knows how to navigate through that. But to touch on without getting a response, and well, I'm going to just stop sending them because she's not responding. And one of the number one things I hear is, well, I don't want to cause her more pain, right? That's one of the big things around this conversation. Guys, she's already sad. Like, it's not up to you to determine what kind of grief those pictures are going to inflict. Right. And so, like Casey said, in a very more appropriate way, just send the dang pictures. Okay, you guys, until she literally comes to you and says, stop sending me stuff, you don't stop. And if it starts to just feel like a checklist thing or an obligation thing, that's something that you need to pay attention to and that you need to work through. And if you're sending them with the expectation of a response and a pat on the back, what are you doing?
Right.
If you're sending them because you feel like you have integrity and it's the right thing to do, and because you really do love her, it shouldn't feel like a job. And at the end of the day, if her grief does not allow her to open them, that's on her, but you don't get to determine that and just say, well, I'm going to stop sending them because she hasn't responded. You guys, she literally might not even be able to get out of bed. And if you're more concerned about getting a response than just allowing her to receive them when she's ready, we're missing it. There's a disconnect there. And it's hard to say, you guys have to do all the work and follow up and love well when she's completely absent. So I want you to know the contradiction that this sounds like. But in adoption, it is that. At the end of the day, you have a life with the child that we let go of. You should have a moral responsibility to that.
Right. Loving first doesn't mean that you're expecting something in return.
That's right.
Yep. Talk to us a little bit. We're shifting gears a little bit. We talked a lot about like post-placement stuff. Healthy boundaries. Now, there's healthy boundaries on both sides. There's healthy boundaries both pre-placement and post-placement. Can you tell us what that even means? Healthy boundaries.
So, because no one knows what boundaries really actually means. So this is the way I like to look at it. And this is kind of a little bit of a different perspective, but I think it's really powerful. And this is for anybody listening, any side of the triad. We need to stop looking at boundaries as a form of punishment. And so when I tell adoptive families that they need to set healthy boundaries, they kind of are like, well, the birth mom did this, and so we need to set a boundary and punish them and tell them they can't have this anymore because they did something wrong. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're saying is, let's look at boundaries as tolerance instead of punishment. Okay, so let's say she's doing something, because guys, the birth moms can be crazy. Like, let's just be honest about that. Okay. I'm a birth mom.
Yeah. The adoptive family could be too.
Yeah. We all have our crazy. Okay. We all have our trauma. We all have our insecurities and jealousies. And then we're saying, hi, complete strangers. I'm going to throw you together in the most intimate, hard thing in the world with a baby. And then you guys have to do life together. Good luck. Like, come on, guys, we're going to screw it up and do stupid things and be emotional and jealous and insecure. It's okay. Okay. So let's look at it like this. The birth mother does something that makes you feel really uncomfortable.
Okay. This is a good example, Ashley.
Okay.
Whenever a birth mom maybe asks the family for money after like the 8-week or 6-week period of post-placement care. So let's say that they're a year out and she's constantly saying, can you send me some pizza? Can you send me some groceries? I really need some gas money to get to work. That's a good example. Can we talk about boundary setting with a mom like that?
Yep. Great example, because that happens a lot. And I am not an advocate of giving money after relinquishment. And I've made that stance publicly many times. Now, that is up to the individual relationships, again, that if they feel like they can serve and love well and want to do that. I know an amazing adoptive couple that bought a house for one of their children's biological parents. Okay. I don't think that's again, that's the sleepover extreme, right?
Right.
But here's what this needs to look like is, I can't give you money anymore because it's inappropriate for you to ask me. Okay. And so you've asked me for this inappropriate thing. And so I'm just going to close this off, because that's what they do. They just kind of shut down and close off. Okay. Now let's look at a form of tolerance. Okay. Because when we're punishing them, we're saying that she's bad. Okay.
Right.
This isn't about making somebody else change. This is about saying you don't need to do anything different, but I can only tolerate this in this way. So this is about saying we can continue to have an amazing relationship. It just can't include financial support. Okay. It's not just saying, oh my gosh, she's being crazy and she's asking for money and I can't do this. So I'm just going to completely pull back, because that's our tendency. We start putting walls up, because if she's asking for money, then she's going to ask for this and she's going to ask for this. This is about saying, hey, I understand that you need some financial support. I can direct you to some resources in your area. We're going to continue with this, and this, but our relationship cannot include financial support. Okay.
Right.
And guess what? That's not telling her that she has to change. That's not telling her that she's wrong. It's saying we can't do that. So we're taking ownership over that. But we would love to be able to still move forward for this. And then here's what happens. She's going to emotionally react. Allow room for that. This is the biggest mistake when setting boundaries, is you change the game and then you get mad when she reacts. Okay, so let's be honest about that. You're going to say, our relationship has been going forward like this. We're going to change it. You have to allow for a little bit of emotional reaction. Okay, she's going to be defensive. She's going to call you names. She might be kind of erratic, okay, in behavior. But once the dust settles, she'll either accept it and move forward with you, or she'll make a decision to not. But that's on her, not on you. Okay. We have to be realistic about what we can and can't follow through with. Now, I always talk about under promising and over deliver, right? And again, you can't know 10 years from now what that's going to look like. But when you're in the hospital, don't throw in the kitchen sink just because you want the baby and you want her to like love you to death. That's like the hopeful adoptive couples want to give it away all up front to show that we're going to show up and love well. Well, guess what? They pick you for that reason. And when you don't follow through, you're going to be the bad guy.
Yep.
And so you have to be realistic in those situations, but it's okay that even when you're a year out, that's why I talk about mediation, coming back to the table and say, okay, what's working and what's not. We do mediation for everything. Why can't we do it in open adoptions? This works. This worked this year and this didn't. What would you like to see different? This is what we would like to see different. Can we find a compromise? Great. Let's try it for a year and then we'll come back together and see how it goes.
Yeah.
It really can be that simple, guys. Here's the biggest, and we're terrified. And from the adoptive parent side, the adoptive parent guilt is so real because you guys blame yourself for so much of the struggle that she's having that you feel like you have to pay her money or give her something or send her groceries, because part of the reason why she's starving is because I took her baby and she's in so much grief and suffering because of that trauma that now I have to try and fix it by groceries. Okay.
Right.
Let yourself off the freaking hook, you guys. It is not your fault what happens post placement with her. It really, you guys can either help it or make it worse, but it's not your fault. Okay. Her pain and suffering is not your fault just because you ended up with that child. We chose you, remember?
That's such a good point. And it's such a dance too, like making sure that you're loving her well, but you're not, I guess, giving handouts. And
so I'm just going to go ahead and transition here for you guys, because you guys asked the question about, you know, the more you educate yourself, the more you're looking back and been like, oh my gosh, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And you feel like you failed like a million times over. And one of the things about the evolution of adoption and what we're learning more and more is that what you were doing in the past is never going to be enough, right? It's about doing with what you learn now. But I want to validate the adoptive parents in this space to say, you guys are doing enough. At the end of the day, you have to remember, and it's hard to keep clarity about the reason why you have that child in your home to begin with. And that came from a choice that a mother made based on the fact that she felt unworthy or unqualified to parent a child. And so she chose somebody that was willing to step in and take all of the responsibility, all of the heartache, all of the pain, all of the joy, all of the financial burden, all of it. And they were willing to take that on. And we asked you to do one thing. We asked you to take that child and to love it well and to take care of it and to be the parents. Are you doing that? If you're doing that, you're already doing exactly what was asked of you. Everything else is gravy. And so I just want to remind you that in that space, when you feel like you're not doing enough or you haven't been doing it well, guys, the sense of entitlement that comes from the biological parent side, because we're going to play that card. Well, we gave you a baby, so we deserve this. Guys, that's crap. Okay. Really, at the end of the day, we asked you to take on a child because we couldn't. And if you've stepped up and done that, that's awesome. Okay. And that's enough. The rest, anything else that you can provide is gravy. Now, I want you to have integrity in your open adoption relationships. I want you to love well because you actually do. I want you to do this because it's the best for everyone involved, especially the child, which is what this is really about. But I want you guys to give yourself a break. Guys, I have two parents, or well, I have two parents, but I have two kids of my own. Guys, I have two kids that I parent. Let's be honest, parenting can really suck sometimes. Okay. Like, I'm always like, oh man, that 5% of just absolutely amazing, like, erases the 95% of suck of parenthood. Okay. So adopted children or not, parenthood is so hard. And you guys were willing to take on that responsibility without even hesitation. Guys, that's incredible. Now, there's going to be a lot of negative in the communities, and people are going to spin that. And the adoptive parents are vicious, horrible creatures for doing this. And the biological parents are trash and all of this stuff. You guys, I don't care. At the end of the day, I found myself in an impossible situation, feeling very unworthy and unqualified to raise my child at the time. And with all of the information that I had, I made a choice. I made a choice and I picked them to step in and do all of the things that I couldn't. And they have done that well. And everything else that's been offered has just been a bonus. It was not expected, it's not required. It's not an obligation. They do it because they love me and because they love him. At the end of the day, though, they're raising him and loving him as their own. And that's what I asked him to do.
Another thing I just want to ask is speak to, say or one of our listeners is considering embarking upon the adoption process. Why is education so important?
I think the biggest thing about education is that you need to know what you're getting into. Yeah. It is not just about the end game of a baby. It's not. There's so much more involved, and this is for life. When you choose adoption, you choose a relationship for life, whether the other sides of the triad are present or not. This is a relationship for life, and it doesn't get to be just I go and get a baby and come home and that's the end. Really, the adoption journey doesn't really start until the hospital. People think that that's when it ends, and that's a lie. The adoption journey really doesn't get started until after the adoption is finalized. This is just laying the foundation, guys. The real adventure doesn't start until after. It doesn't end there. And so I want so deeply adoptive families to be able to do it well, but they can't do that if they don't know what's coming. And I know it's really scary to lean into really uncomfortable things and to know that you're going to be a part of such a grief and trauma story, and that you're going to be connected to that, and that you're going to have to raise children that might have some of those traumatic issues. And that's scary to lean into. But there's so much love and beauty there too. But if you're not prepared for it, you will fail at this. And I will do anything and share any part of myself to help prevent that from happening, because we need families to do it well. And we need birth mothers to step up and get the grief and trauma support. But if you guys aren't educated, you will fail at this, because it's more than just a baby.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, Ashley, we're going to put your Instagram handles in the show notes, as well as the website link to the Back to Basics class, as well as Lifetime Healing's website. But real quickly, in case people they have their phones out, can you go ahead and tell everyone what your Instagram handle names are and the website link?
Yes, you can come and find me on Instagram at Big Tough Girl. And then I'm also at Lifetime Healing LLC. And we have a lot of conversation. We do a ton of live videos. We have a ton of free resources at lifetimehealingadoption.com. You can click on our video library, and we have hours and hours and hours of free video. So if you just feel like pulling up a tub of popcorn one night, you could learn more than you would ever want to know from a birth mother perspective. But I would love for you guys to come and follow along and just kind of lean into a side that's really quiet, that's really broken, and just it'll help you love the child better to understand the loss that takes place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know I can speak from an adoptive mom standpoint that I have learned so much from you, and in a way that is coming from an understanding tone, and you validate adoptive families a ton, and you listen to us a ton, and you speak to us in a way that, no judgment and lots of grace. And so I've learned a ton, and I know that as an agency, Quiverful has learned a ton from you as well. So we are very thankful for you.
Thank you so much. I love you guys so much. You know I love you. I just want to tell people out there, when you're leaning in and listening, and I appreciate that support from you guys, but really, even if it comes across harsh, I'm very known for my boldness, that it always is comes from a place of love and support of you. I'm a very rare birth mom voice that wants the adopted parents to be successful. And so I hope you know that I am standing with you.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for your time.
Of course.
And we are super excited to see where you're headed in the next year.
Thank you. You too.
Have you heard about the Promise Summit? If you are out there and you're listening right now and you are hoping to adopt, or you're an adoptive parent, or you're struggling with infertility, or maybe you feel called to adoption and you just have no clue where to start, then you need to be at the Promise Summit. Casey, tell us a little bit about what the Promise Summit is.
The Promise Summit is a Christian conference for couples considering adoption, in the wait of adoption, and or families who have adopted. This event is packed with powerful speakers, incredible worship, and a panel that represents all members of the adoption triad, and is sure to be a weekend that you will never forget. Our hope is that you leave the Promise Summit forever changed and armed with the promises from God that will encourage you throughout your entire adoption journey.
The Promise Summit will be held May 3rd and 4th in Greenville, South Carolina, and we would love to meet you there. You can find out more information at thepromisesummit.com or on Instagram at The Promise Summit.